Hello everybody, it's Gordon here today talking to you about all the things you probably need to think about when revising an inspector calls by JB Priestley. Okay, where do we start with that? Well, I think the first thing to start with is the plot. You need to have a really clear and crisp understanding of what happens in this play. Well, let's just take a moment to reflect on that. In this play, the Burling family are visited by this mysterious inspector. Inspector Gould is his name. Arrives out of the blue, arrives very suddenly. They're all relaxed, they're all very easygoing, really. They're having a good time. After all, they're celebrating the engagement of Mr. Burling's daughter, Sheila, to a guy called Gerald Croft. So this is a happy family gathering, a very intimate family gathering. And out of the blue, as I say, the inspector suddenly arrives. Now that's strange enough in itself, and it's a disturbance enough in itself, but to add to that, really, we suddenly find that the inspector reveals that a girl called Eva Smith, we don't know who she is at the moment, has committed suicide, apparently by drinking disinfectant. So really quite unsavoury, not the sort of thing we'd be wanting to hear at a dinner party, and it really sort of throws a significant dampener on the occasion, and that's putting it mildly. So the family are understandably shocked, horrified, confused even as to why the inspector has even called to see them to give them this news about Eva Smith. What's it got to do with them is what they'll all be thinking at this stage in proceedings. Well, the rest of the play essentially consists of really rather a tense and distressing sort of investigation, like a detective thriller really, by this all-knowing, all-seeing inspector, and as a result of this sort of this process, bit by bit, person by person, each member of that family discovers that they're actually all somehow wound up with, caught up in this girl's death. So we've moved very quickly from the start of the play, where they're having this happy social occasion, this celebration, all of a sudden to this situation where their world is shocked and rocked throughout the course of this play. So that's the first thing, the plot that we need to be aware of. Secondly, we need to think about who our characters are. We need to be familiar with them all. We need to get to know them all, what makes them tick, who they are, what role they play in the play. Well, I'm not going to go into too much detail with you, but just to simply summarise, Mr. Burling, the very successful businessman with a very solid, very solid reputation in this community of which he's a part. Terribly respectable individual with very clear and fixed and conservative views, conservative with a little c there. And his wife, of course, Mrs. Burling, very much almost like what's the word? Accessory to Mr. Burling, I suppose you could say. Rarely disagrees with him. Very much seen as his support and part of the team. And then there's his two grown-up children. There's Eric and there's Sheila Burling, both grown up, as I say. It's Sheila's engagement party. And we'll learn gradually about a shift in Sheila's character, Sheila's way of seeing the world, as this whole issue about Eva Smith develops. She's possibly the one character I would say, who changes most of all in the course of this play. In addition, we've got Gerald Croft, her fiance, from another probably a family with slightly higher social status than the Burlings. It's a good match. It's a good relationship that sort of somehow secures the Burling name in the community. Then, of course, we've got Eva Smith, this mysterious young girl who's committed suicide, and then, of course, Inspector Gould. Okay, third thing we need to be aware of is the setting. Very simply, it's an affluent Edwardian home. The action takes place in the Edwardian era, before World War I, before women had the vote, before the Titanic was sunk, before really, all these dreadful sort of and necessary changes in terms of labour relations and gender roles beginning to be challenged and so forth. At this stage in the setting and in the period, there's a huge disparity between rich and poor. Few, if any, workers had any rights. Gender roles are very fixed and traditional. So it's a very, very different world. Please bear in mind, set in the Edwardian era around about 1912, but actually written in 1945, post-World War II. So that's kind of curious because the audience will be aware of, what's actually going to follow 1912, as it were. Fourth thing, or I need you to think about this as a piece of drama now. This is the fourth thing that you should consider really about the play. It's a piece of drama. And the play script, when you read a play, when you watch a play or you read a script, it's a little bit like getting on a fairground ride. In this instance, I would say it's akin to getting on the waltzers, one of those ones where you've got these different sort of almost circular sort of seating arrangements on a fairground ride. And it gets off to quite a slow, sedate start, very gently starting to move. And there's nothing to shock us or rock us even at this early stage. But gradually it becomes faster and faster and faster in terms of its pace. And the speed and the changes that suddenly interrupt that sedate start not only make the pace a little quicker, but also seem to make the whole drama or the world rather more confusing and disorientating for those key characters that we've talked about, the Burlings, for Gerald Croft in particular. They start to question, it's almost as if they and we start to question reality. Who is this inspector? What's he got to do with their lives? Who is Eva Smith? How does that impact on them? And then, like that waltzer ride with one of the fairground attendants who occasionally spins and spins those waltzers round and round, giving an occasional push by the dramatist to make it go faster and seem more dramatic at times. There are key moments throughout that have their individual parts to play. And so that's the fifth thing I'd like to lead you on to, really, to think about a number of key things that can make a difference in the drama. Sixth point, suspense. We've got plenty of suspense in this play. What will the various characters do as more information emerges? We wonder as the audience. We know it's going to happen because it gradually starts to drip into the play. How is that going to impact on this fairly secure, settled, stable middle-class life and family unit? Secondly, another instance of suspense might be something as simple as the mother, Mrs. Burling, lambasting and attacking this perceived suspect, whoever it might be in the Eva Smith case, only to find out as Sheila gradually becomes to suspect that it actually turns out that Eric has a key part to play in terms of his relationship that he's had in the past with Eva Smith. Thirdly, we have a cliffhanger at the end of the play. Fourthly, the whole thing is constructed like a detective thriller. Piece by piece by piece, different parts of the jigsaw are put together, and we become fascinated and try to figure out who's done what, how does it all fit together. The suspense builds accordingly. In addition to which, Mr. Burling's and the Burlings generally, but Mr. Burling continually incorrectly sort of gauges and assesses certain major events that are raised in the play. For example, the Titanic sailing. He's absolutely confident this is the greatest ship in the world and what a wonderful achievement and everything's going to be fine. Or even the rumours of the First World War, which he dismisses out of hand. Now, we as the audience know that these things do come to pass. The Titanic will sink, the First World War will break out, and so forth. So we are aware very, very early on in the play, and therefore, it leads us, in terms of suspense in the play, to perceive that we may just be dealing with characters whose judgment isn't necessarily as sound as it might be. The next point I'd like to make is that there are a number of revelations in the play. The inspector reveals a number of things. It's like he's peeling layers off an onion. Quite surprising. Perhaps the least connected person to the Eva Smith story is Mrs. Burling, the mother in the play. And yet she does have a part to play. She was a significant sort of member of the charity panel that rejected Eva Smith's appeal for aid when she found out she was pregnant. Or we learn about Eric's relationship with Eva. That's quite a surprise, quite shocking, or about his drinking and how he gets into these various messes. We learn about each character in turn, bit by bit by bit, as the inspector provides us either with direct information or knowledge about them, or prompts them to reveal those things about themselves and their actions. The next thing, of course, we need to comment on is the sense of mystery in the play about the actual identity of Eva Smith, for example. Who is she? What was she? What were the circumstances of her death? How did this all come to pass? How can we piece that all together? And not forgetting the mystery about the inspector himself. Where did he come from? How did he suddenly turn up? Hang on a second, Mr. Burling tries to figure out through his chief inspector friend in the police, is there actually an Inspector Gould? Was he a real inspector? Was there a real Eva Smith even? So these mysteries begin to snowball a little later in the play. Then, of course, we've got the classic sort of conflict and dramatic tension in the play. Tension and drama between the various family members. None at the start, but little things leaking out about perhaps the way Eric or Mr. Burling, makes slightly critical remarks about Eric, or the way there's a little bit of joshing between Mr. Burling and his daughter. But all these things gradually build critically in terms of Sheila and Gerald, because of what she finds out about Gerald's role in all these matters. Critically between Sheila and her father even, of course, because she comes to realise her own strength, her own identity, her own voice, and needs to speak her truth in the play. And that, of necessity, involves dealing with her father and challenging her father as the authority figure in the family. That, in turn, of course, creates tension. And there's tension as an audience because, as I said before, we're aware of things that the characters themselves are not aware of in terms of some of those key events that are going to unfold in the world. In addition to which, we've got shock and surprise in the play. The arrival of the inspector, as I said at the outset, is quite a shock to everybody seated around that table. There's shock about the fact of a suicide. A death is bad enough, but to learn about a suicide, more painful, more shocking, more uncomfortable for them to have to deal with and to process. And critically about Eric's involvement with Eva Smith. That's a really big shock, of course, that this family, this solid, respectable family, are somehow involved with this very ordinary working class girl who has ultimately taken her own life. And then finally, we need to consider the relationships in the play. Mr. and Mrs. Burling, as I've already hinted, pretty solid, pretty secure mostly throughout the play, although its tensions do emerge as the revelations spin out. Mr. Burling and Sheila, as I've mentioned before, he still sees her almost as his sort of one of his chattels, or one of his, part of his property to be controlled and, not to be challenged by her. She, of course, fulfills that role early at the start, only to find herself beginning to challenge him and to sort of seek her voice and her independence. Sheila and Gerald, a really quite remarkable relationship there, how that ultimately develops from a really conventional relationship where she's very much his, the subsidiary character in that relationship, moving to very much an equal footing and even sort of taking perhaps the slightly more dominant role in that relationship as the play proceeds. And then, of course, Eric and Eva, and we learn all about that relationship. So much to write about in this play. When you're writing about An Inspector Calls by J.B. Priestley, do remember to think carefully about the way you structure your answer. Choose your information, your evidence from the play, the details that you want to use, and do remember, of course, to use appropriate quotations to support the things you want to say, support your ideas that you're putting together in your essay. So good luck with that. I'll be getting back in touch with you soon with more videos. In the meantime, take care, everybody, and I'll see you soon. Bye for now.